The evening air in New York City was crisp, filled with the familiar symphony of honking cars, vibrant billboards, and the swift movement of pedestrians. In a lavish penthouse with a breathtaking view of Central Park, James Crawford reclined in his leather armchair, savoring a glass of whiskey. He was a man who possessed it all: wealth, authority, and sway. His business empire, constructed through real estate ventures, positioned him among the richest individuals in the city. Yet, in the midst of his achievements, he was consumed by pride, and his thoughts were tainted by the conviction that love took a backseat to riches. By the fireplace, his wife Emily fidgeted with the hem of her dress, a nervous energy radiating from her. For days, she had been mustering the courage to share the news with him, yet each time she met his cold, calculating gaze, doubt crept in. Tonight, however, she could no longer hold back. With a deep breath, she moved ahead. "James, I have something to share with you," she murmured gently. James hardly paid her any mind, his gaze fixated on the whiskey swirling in his glass. "Proceed," he remarked with an air of indifference. "I'm pregnant," she murmured, her voice quivering. In that fleeting instant, silence enveloped the space. James set his glass down on the table and directed his gaze toward her, his expression a mystery. Then, rather than joy or excitement, a sly grin crept onto his face. "Expecting?" he echoed with a hint of sarcasm. "So, you really think I'm going to accept that this child belongs to me?" Emily felt a heavy weight in her chest. "James, what do you mean?" "Absolutely, it's yours. Our journey together has spanned 3 wonderful years of marriage. What reason would I have to be untruthful about this?" James rose suddenly, his imposing stature creating a shadow that enveloped her. "Don't act all innocent, Emily. From the very beginning, my mother cautioned me about you. She claimed you were only interested in my wealth, and now you're validating her assertion." Emotion flooded Emily's eyes. "Your mother. James, your mother has always had a disfavor towards me. She always hoped you would choose a partner from within your own social circle. Yet, my affection for you stemmed from your true self, not your wealth." James emitted a sardonic chuckle. "Chuckle? Please, spare me the humor. I understand it clearly now. Do you really believe this child will guarantee your position in my life? So, you believe you will have an everlasting stake in my riches?" Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Your money doesn't interest me, James. I simply wish to convey this happiness to you. I assumed you would feel joy." James moved in, his face just inches away from hers. "I have my doubts about you, Emily, and I refuse to be ensnared by the prospect of a child." Her hands moved to her stomach, a natural gesture of safeguarding the life blossoming within her. "James, I beg you, don't go through with this," she implored. "This is our little one." Yet, James had firmly resolved his decision. He delved into his pocket and retrieved a checkbook. "Here," he remarked, jotting down a figure. "Take this and go. Financial concerns will be a thing of the past." Emily gazed at the check in disbelief. "Do you really believe I can be bought?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you really believe I would exchange my child for something as trivial as a piece of paper?" James's expression grew steely. "If you have no interest in the money, then depart with empty hands. However, you won't be remaining here. Gather your belongings and leave." The certainty in his voice sent a shiver through Emily. In that moment, she understood that the man she had once married was a mere shadow, perhaps never truly present at all. In silence, she pivoted and made her way to the bedroom, tears cascading down her cheeks. With trembling hands, she packed a small bag. This was her sanctuary, the space where she had woven aspirations alongside him. And now she found herself cast aside, as if she were an unfamiliar face. As she emerged from the room, James lingered by the door, arms crossed in a stance that spoke volumes. "Never return," he stated with a chill in his voice. Emily cast a final glance his way, yearning for a hint of remorse to flicker in his gaze. However, there was nothing. With a profound sense of sorrow, she stepped into the biting cold of the night. She found herself at a crossroads, with no destination in sight. Her family was in Chicago, far away, and she found herself without any friends in the city. She meandered through the streets of Manhattan, the vibrant neon lights and throngs of people starkly juxtaposed against the void she carried within. She held her stomach gently, murmuring, "I'll look after you, my little one. I will always ensure your well-being comes first." As the minutes ticked by, the weight of her circumstances became increasingly undeniable. She found herself without a place to call home, devoid of funds, and utterly alone. Yet she possessed something far more precious, her unwavering resolve. She would not allow James's cruelty to shatter her spirit. She would endure. She would nurture her child with affection, even if she had to embark on this journey solo. Unbeknownst to her, 2 decades later, destiny would lead her back to the man who had left her behind. Yet this time, the dynamics would shift. Before moving on to the next part, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Emily trembled as she strolled through the bustling streets of New York City, the sharp wind slicing through her light coat. The towering skyscrapers, once beacons of thrill and aspiration, now loomed heavily, casting a shadow of confinement. In just a few hours, everything she had known had crumbled around her. The man she had cherished, the one she had entrusted with her deepest feelings, had cast her aside without a moment's thought. She encircled her abdomen with her arms, a tender gesture that acknowledged the gentle rise of her pregnancy. She found herself without a home, without funds, and without a destination. The revelation was intense, yet she remained steadfast and composed. She needed to ponder. She needed to endure for the sake of her child. As darkness enveloped the city, Emily wandered through the streets, searching for a refuge to pause and gather her thoughts. She meandered into Grand Central Terminal, discovering a bench tucked away in a more tranquil corner. She settled into her seat, weary, her body protesting from the long hours spent on her feet. Amidst the bustling crowd, passengers hurried to board their trains, their journeys propelling them onward, while her own path had abruptly ceased to progress. She shut her eyes briefly, attempting to drown out the clamor, yet slumber eluded her. The ache of hunger twisted in her belly, a stark reminder that she had not eaten since the morning. Yet sustenance demanded funds, and she possessed none. By morning, she realized that remaining in New York was no longer an option for her. The city felt prohibitively costly, and each avenue echoed with memories of James. A new beginning was essential for her. Memories of her old college friend Rachel, who resided in Chicago, filled her mind. Though the years had pulled them apart, Rachel's kindness remained a constant in her character. It was a gamble, yet Emily found herself with no alternatives. With a sense of trepidation, she navigated through the bustling Port Authority bus terminal, her hands quivering as she drew closer to the ticket counter. The clerk hardly raised their gaze. He then summoned the board. "I need a bus ticket to Chicago," she murmured, her voice scarcely rising above a whisper. He inquired whether it was a one-way or round trip. Emily paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. A round trip signifies that she possesses a destination to come back to. Yet, she found herself with nothing remaining in New York. She whispered, "One way." "That'll be $120, the clerk remarked, his fingers dancing over the screen. Emily felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She possessed nothing. Completely devoid of anything. She moved to the side, her thoughts swirling rapidly. She had never pleaded in her life, but what option remained for her? With a steadying breath, she moved closer to a woman of middle age who exuded warmth. "Excuse me," she uttered with a hint of uncertainty. "I find myself in a truly difficult predicament. I need to reach Chicago, but I'm short on funds for a bus ticket. If you could provide any assistance." The woman's gaze flickered elsewhere, filled with unease. "I'm sorry, I can't help," she murmured, hurrying away. Emily took a deep breath and made another attempt. She approached an elderly man, distinguished in a sharp suit, and a young couple intertwined in each other's hands. The reactions were consistent: sorrow, evasion, dismissal. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Just as she was on the brink of surrender, a gentle tap on her shoulder interrupted her thoughts. She glanced over to find a tall, slender man with gentle eyes. He appeared as though he had endured numerous struggles. "Chicago, huh?" he remarked. "I spent my formative years in that place. What amount do you require?" $120, she admitted, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. The gentleman acknowledged with a nod and retrieved his wallet. He passed her the precise sum effortlessly. "I've experienced what you're going through," he stated plainly. "Simply make a commitment to extend kindness to others when the opportunity arises." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. She vowed that she would. "Thanks a lot. This holds immense significance for me." As the bus rolled away, she gazed out the window, witnessing the city fade into the distance. As the distance unfolded before her, she pondered the possibilities that awaited her. She was uncertain whether Rachel would welcome her. She was uncertain about her path to survival. Yet, for the first time since James had cast her aside, a flicker of hope emerged within her. As the bus rolled into Chicago the following morning, a surge of anxiety washed over Emily. She recalled Rachel's last known address from a faded Christmas card, yet she lacked a phone to make a call in advance. She disembarked from the bus, inhaling deeply. The atmosphere was invigorating, and the urban landscape thrummed with energy. Chicago had a distinct character compared to New York, lacking some of the shine but exuding a certain warmth. With her dwindling funds, she summoned a cab and provided Rachel's address. As the vehicle navigated the bustling city streets, she made an effort to soothe her anxious thoughts. Upon arriving at a quaint apartment building in Lincoln Park, Emily paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. What would have happened if Rachel had made a different choice and moved? What if she had forgotten her? Gathering her resolve, she rapped on the door. Moments stretched endlessly before it finally revealed itself. Rachel stood there, her eyes growing wide with disbelief. "Emily," she exclaimed. Emotions cascaded down Emily's cheeks. She confessed that she was at a loss for where to turn next. Rachel glanced at her, noting the frayed fabric of her clothes, the exhaustion etched in her eyes, and the way she held her stomach. Without a moment's pause, she enveloped her in a warm embrace. "Step inside," she commanded with authority. As Emily entered, the cozy embrace of the apartment welcomed her like an old friend. It was a quaint little space, warm and inviting, adorned with shelves of books and cherished framed photographs. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the atmosphere. Rachel guided her to the couch and draped a blanket over her. "Tell me everything," she urged, worry evident in her expression. Emily inhaled unsteadily and started to articulate her thoughts. She confided in Rachel about James, the pregnancy, and how he had cast her aside without a moment's hesitation. Rachel remained quiet, her gaze deepening with fury. "That scoundrel," she whispered as Emily concluded. "You are worthy of far greater things." Emily brushed away her tears. "I'm feeling lost, Rachel. I find myself without a job and without a place to call home. I can't bring this child up in such a harsh environment." Rachel grasped her hand. "You're not by yourself. Feel free to remain here for as long as you require. Together, we will navigate through this and find our way." After days of burden, Emily finally sensed a release from the heaviness that had settled upon her heart. She had company. She possessed a companion. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had an opportunity to reconstruct her existence. Before moving on to the next part, please consider subscribing to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. As the days stretched into weeks, Emily gradually found her footing in the unfamiliar landscape of Chicago. Rachel's cozy apartment transformed into her sanctuary, a space where she could exhale freely, unburdened by the threat of eviction. Each morning, she awoke to the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the distant hum of city traffic seeping through the windows, and the warm presence of Rachel, who had transformed from a mere acquaintance into a cherished member of her family. Yet, in spite of the warmth and kindness Rachel extended, Emily understood that she couldn't depend on her indefinitely. She needed to become self-sufficient, discover a means to sustain herself, and above all, get ready for the impending arrival of her baby. Her initial hurdle was securing employment. Without any savings and lacking a college degree, her choices were quite restricted. She wandered the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, diligently completing applications at cafes, diners, and retail shops. Rejections arrived quickly, some courteous, others quite dismissive. We seek an individual with experience, otherwise, they might indicate that we are not currently hiring. Despite the discouragement, she remained resolute in her determination to persevere. After a long afternoon spent searching for jobs, she decided to take a break at a quaint diner in River North. The air was filled with the enticing aroma of sizzling burgers and warm, freshly baked pies. The notice in the window stated that assistance was needed. With a sense of urgency, she entered and made her way to the counter. A woman in her middle years, with keen eyes and a weary demeanor, glanced up from the task of cleaning a coffee mug. "What would you like?" she inquired. "I noticed the sign outside," Emily said, her voice tinged with anxiety. "Is there still an opportunity for employment?" The woman observed her intently for a brief moment. "Have you ever had experience working in a restaurant?" Emily gave a slight shake of her head. "No, but I pick things up quickly. This job is incredibly important to me." The woman let out a sigh as she placed the mug on the table. "The task at hand is quite challenging. The compensation leaves much to be desired, and the clientele can sometimes be quite unpleasant. Do you believe you can manage that?" Emily nodded with enthusiasm. "I will go to any lengths necessary." The woman, identifying herself as Margaret, the proprietor, cast a doubtful glance at Emily before presenting her with an apron. "All right. Your journey begins tomorrow. Early hours. Make sure to arrive on time." Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her, almost bringing her to tears. It may have been modest, but it marked the beginning. That evening, she revealed the news to Rachel, who embraced her warmly. "Do you see? You're making strides," she remarked with a grin. The following morning, Emily showed up bright and early, resolute in her quest to demonstrate her capabilities. The diner was an unassuming spot, a regular haunt for truck drivers, office workers, and locals who had been visiting for years. The tasks were draining, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, clearing tables, but for the first time in weeks, Emily experienced a newfound sense of purpose. She was not merely enduring, she was battling for a brighter tomorrow. With each passing day, she began to tuck away every dollar she could find. She reduced her spending by dining solely on Rachel's home-cooked meals and opting to walk rather than take the bus. Yet, despite having the job, she was aware that something deeper was missing. The journey of pregnancy brought forth a wave of medical expenses, and soon the reality of diapers, clothing, and the myriad costs of nurturing a child would set in. After a long shift, she found herself seated across from Rachel at their cozy kitchen table one evening. She acknowledged that there was more to be done. "This position falls short." Rachel, immersed in the task of grading papers from her teaching job, paused to reflect. "Have you considered enrolling in evening courses? Perhaps something that might assist you in securing a more favorable position." Emily let out a deep breath. "I lack the time and resources for that." Rachel drummed her pen rhythmically against the table. "What are your thoughts on community programs? In the city, various organizations provide support for single mothers. Some provide scholarships, job training, opportunities that could benefit you in the long term. The notion ignited a flicker of optimism within Emily. The following day, she made her way to the Chicago Women's Resource Center, where she encountered a counselor named Linda. She shared her circumstances, and Linda attentively absorbed the details before presenting her with a list of programs. She assured Emily that she was not alone in this. Some individuals are eager to lend a hand. Emily was particularly drawn to one of the programs, a training course designed for medical office assistants. It was concise, budget-friendly, and guaranteed consistent employment prospects. Without hesitation, she enrolled, resolute in her quest to create a secure future for her child. With each passing week, her belly expanded, mirroring the strength of her resolve. She juggled work, classes, and doctor's appointments, persevering through fatigue, fully aware that every ounce of effort was dedicated to her child. Margaret at the diner recognized her commitment and started to show her greater respect, sometimes discreetly offering her extra food to take home. Rachel stood steadfast, offering unwavering support and encouragement through the most challenging times. One evening, while sitting in her room and folding baby clothes she had purchased from a second-hand store, Rachel experienced a sudden flutter in her stomach. She paused, her hand resting gently on the small bump, and then she felt it once more, a tiny, unmistakable kick. Tears welled in her eyes as she softly murmured, "You're truly in there, aren't you?" In that instant, she experienced a profound bond with her baby, a love so overwhelming that it eclipsed all the hurt James had inflicted. Meanwhile, in a different part of the country, James Crawford reveled in his opulent lifestyle in New York, blissfully ignorant of the woman he had left behind. His business empire continued to expand, with his name featured in articles from Forbes and various finance publications. Women drifted in and out, each one fleeting, none leaving a significant mark. He had persuaded himself that his actions were justified, that Emily had merely been an error in judgment. He never paused to reflect on the child he had left behind. Yet destiny had its own plans for reunion, and James remained unaware that 2 decades later, Emily would re-enter his life, transformed from the fragile woman he once knew into a figure of remarkable strength beyond his wildest expectations. Yet for her son Daniel. From the instant he entered the world at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, she realized her calling transcended any suffering James had caused her. Cradling him for the first time, his delicate fingers entwined with hers, she vowed silently to ensure he would never experience the loneliness she once knew. The initial years were the most challenging. She put in long hours, occasionally taking on double shifts at the diner, all while finishing her training as a medical office assistant. Rachel stayed close, assisting with Daniel's care as Emily's commitments grew too demanding. On certain evenings, Emily would return home drained, her body weary, yet the instant she caught sight of her baby's drowsy grin, all her efforts seemed justified. When Daniel turned 5, Emily had landed a full-time position at a pediatric clinic in Lincoln Park, finally moving on from her days at the diner. It was a modest triumph, yet one of great importance. The reliable income allowed her to secure a more appealing living situation, a small yet inviting 2-bedroom apartment nestled in a secure area. Life remained challenging, yet it had found a sense of stability. She ensured Daniel was well equipped with books, cozy clothing, and occasional little treats. Emily seldom pondered over James. In the beginning, she experienced flashes of rage, instances when she questioned whether he ever felt remorse for his actions. Yet, as time went by, she came to understand that fixating on him was merely a drain on her vitality. He decided to wipe them from his existence, while she opted to create a fresh start. Daniel blossomed into a thoughtful and kind-hearted young man. He possessed Emily's dark hair and unwavering spirit, yet his piercing blue eyes were undeniably his father's. Emily always laid the truth bare before him. She informed him that his father had departed prior to his birth, that he was a formidable businessman in New York, yet her words carried no trace of resentment. Some individuals make decisions that cannot be reversed, she would assert, yet that does not determine your identity. Daniel rarely inquired about James. To him, his mother encompassed everything he held dear. He was captivated by her strength, her unwavering spirit, and the way she effortlessly wore a smile, regardless of her exhaustion. When Daniel reached the age of 18, he had transformed into the embodiment of Emily's dreams, a responsible and ambitious young man, equipped with a keen intellect and a heart brimming with kindness. His acceptance into Columbia University brought a surge of pride and a twinge of fear to Emily's heart. Releasing him was the most challenging decision she had ever faced, yet she understood he was worthy of the finest chances. As she bid him farewell in New York City, she embraced him fiercely, murmuring, "Go leave your imprint on the world, my dear." He vowed to reach out daily, and as she observed him blend into the throng of students, she experienced the burden of her sacrifices alongside the exquisite essence of their shared creation. In the meantime, James Crawford's journey had taken an alternate path. His achievements in real estate soared to unprecedented levels, establishing him as one of the richest individuals in New York. Yet, triumph had been achieved at a price. Throughout the years, he had entered into matrimony on 2 occasions, each culminating in acrimonious separations. He fathered children in both unions, yet their communication with him was minimal. His empire bestowed upon him riches that knew no bounds, yet true happiness eluded him. He had consistently brushed aside the past, entombing memories of Emily deep within, convinced that his actions had been essential. He reassured himself that he had moved forward, that she was merely a distant memory. Yet destiny had its own designs. One evening, as Daniel strolled through Manhattan, filled with anticipation for his new life, he came upon a towering skyscraper, its name, Crawford Enterprises, boldly displayed across its facade. He recognized the name from somewhere in the past. It was something his mother had brought up during his childhood. A deep sense of curiosity ignited within him, and for the first time, he experienced an intense desire to uncover the truth about the man who had left them behind. With a pounding heart, he retrieved his phone and started to look for information. Piece after piece illustrated the portrait of a merciless entrepreneur, a figure revered for his riches yet condemned for his absence of compassion. As Daniel perused the images of James Crawford, a disquieting blend of feelings washed over him. This was the individual who had opted for authority instead of kinship, a person who had turned away without a glance back. On that particular night, Daniel reached out to Emily. "Mom," he said thoughtfully, "do you ever think he might regret it?" The line was eerily quiet. Emily was fully aware of whom he was referring to. She inhaled deeply before responding. "Perhaps," she murmured gently. "Yet, I ceased my pondering quite some time back." Daniel took his time before replying. His mother had moved forward, yet a part of him yearned for resolution. He was uncertain about what he sought, a confrontation, an apology, or merely a recognition of his presence. In the coming weeks, he delved into every detail he could find about James Crawford. As he delved deeper into his studies, a growing sense of conflict began to stir within him. His father had constructed a realm, yet one must ponder the price paid for such an endeavor. Accounts of broken unions, distant offspring, and cutthroat corporate maneuvers crafted a narrative of a man who possessed everything yet appeared to lack the most essential of all. One afternoon, as he strolled near Wall Street, Daniel resolved to take a daring step. As he stepped into the imposing Crawford Enterprises building, his heart raced with anticipation. A well-dressed woman in her 40s, the receptionist, glanced up. "Do you have an appointment?" she inquired. "No," Daniel confessed. "However, I must speak with Mr. Crawford. It holds significance." The woman arched an eyebrow. "And who might you be?" Daniel paused for just a moment before finally voicing the words that had lingered in his throat for years. "I am his son." The receptionist at Crawford Enterprises fixed her gaze on Daniel for an extended moment, her composed facade wavering just a touch. Her eyes held a hint of skepticism, yet beneath it lay a spark of curiosity. She scrutinized him, weighing the possibility that this young man in front of her might actually be speaking the truth. Daniel experienced an unusual blend of feelings. He entered the building on a whim, lacking a plan or any notion of what might unfold. And now, as he stood here, asserting his identity, it suddenly felt tangible in a way it never had before. He was the offspring of James Crawford. The individual who had forsaken his mother, the one who had wiped them from his existence, was seated somewhere within this towering structure of glass, utterly oblivious to the fact that the echoes of the past were poised to confront him. The receptionist at last cleared her throat. "Do you have any identification?" she inquired, her tone polished yet tinged with doubt. After a moment of uncertainty, Daniel retrieved his driver's license. She cast a fleeting look at the name, yet it revealed nothing to her. Naturally, he carried his mother's surname. "Wait here," she instructed, rising to her feet. She glided through a polished glass door, leaving Daniel solitary in the expansive lobby, enveloped by the quiet resonance of achievement. He surveyed the space, absorbing the lofty ceilings, the grand artwork, and the meticulously arranged sophistication of everything surrounding him. This was the realm his father had crafted, the realm he had selected over kinship. Time seemed to elongate, each minute dragging on as if it were an eternity. Daniel shifted on his feet, his heart racing faster with every fleeting moment. Just as he was on the verge of rethinking his choice, the glass door swung open once more. A figure in a dark suit appeared, a security officer who was both tall and broad-shouldered. As he drew closer to Daniel, his expression remained a mystery. "Mr. Crawford will see you," he stated, his tone steady yet impartial. "Come along with me." Daniel took a deep breath and gave a firm nod. He trailed the man through a labyrinth of glass-walled offices and marble corridors, his palms clammy even in the cool air. At last, they came to a halt before an imposing wooden door. The security officer swung the door wide, unveiling an expansive office adorned with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan. Atop a polished black desk, a figure loomed, one Daniel recognized from the pages of news articles and the frames of interviews. James Crawford. His father. James lifted his gaze from the screen, his striking blue eyes, those familiar eyes that Daniel encountered in his own reflection, narrowing just a bit. He appeared more seasoned than the images implied, with strands of gray weaving through his hair and creases on his face that whispered of years filled with tension. Yet he continued to exude the same presence of strength and authority that had established him as a figure of renown in the corporate realm. For a brief instant, he observed Daniel intently, his face a mask of mystery. Then, in a tone that was both incisive and aloof, he inquired, "Who are you?" Daniel's stomach nodded, yet his gaze remained steady. "I am Daniel," he stated calmly. "Daniel Carter." He allowed the words to linger in the atmosphere for a brief moment before continuing, "Your son." James paused before responding. His fingers, previously poised on the laptop keyboard, curled gently. His jaw tightened, yet his face stayed meticulously neutral. "I don't have a son," he stated with an air of indifference. Daniel emitted a faint, sardonic chuckle. "Indeed, he mentioned that. I anticipated you'd respond that way." He advanced a step, determined not to allow James to brush him off so readily. "You abandoned my mother while she was expecting. You cast her out of your home as if she were insignificant. She nurtured me single-handedly, toiling tirelessly so that I could have a better future. All this time, you've remained in your fortress, acting as if we are mere phantoms." James took a deep breath, releasing it slowly as he sought to organize his thoughts. He rose from his chair, gliding around the desk with deliberate strides. Up close, Daniel noticed the subtle pause in his gaze, a brief glimmer of an emotion he couldn't fully articulate. "Emily Carter," James whispered softly, as if the name held a secret all its own. That was the name she carried. He glanced at Daniel once more, and this time, his gaze held a depth beyond mere cold detachment. There was acknowledgement. He remarked that she had never made an effort to reach out to him. Daniel's fists tightened into hard knots. Why would she? He retorted sharply. It was evident that she had no place in your world. You cast her aside with nothing to her name. She didn't return because she valued her self-respect. She was perfectly fine on her own. James exhaled deeply, his hand brushing over his face. For the first time, he appeared weary. Not the fatigue of a corporate mogul but something more profound. A weightier matter. You really shouldn't be here, he said at last. Daniel's heart raced with fury. Oh, is it just a matter of your convenience? Because it disrupts the ideal existence you've crafted for yourself? He shook his head, his voice tinged with exasperation. I didn't arrive with the intention of seeking financial gain. I have no expectations from you. I simply wish to meet you in person. To grasp the reasons behind a man abandoning his own child and never glancing back. James remained quiet for an extended period. When he finally uttered a word, his voice was soft and subdued. Do you really believe it was simple? He averted his gaze, making his way to the window. Do you really believe I haven't considered it? Daniel gazed at him, his expression one of utter disbelief. If you contemplated it, you certainly didn't take any action. James emitted a sardonic laugh. What would you have preferred I do? I was youthful and driven. I found myself unprepared for the role of a father. He pivoted to confront Daniel, his gaze steely. What if I had made the effort to connect? What if I had made an effort to be included in your life? Would Emily have allowed me? Daniel paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. He was aware that his mother had never expressed a desire to have James return to their lives. However, that did not justify James's actions. You didn't even make an effort, Daniel remarked softly. That is the distinction. James observed him closely, and for the first time, a flicker of what could be interpreted as regret crossed his features. He conceded that you were correct. I did not. Daniel inhaled deeply. He arrived seeking clarity, and perhaps he found it, albeit not in the form he had hoped for. His father was not a villain. He was merely a man. A deeply flawed and self-centered individual who made a choice long ago and has never reconsidered it. Perhaps that was even more detrimental. I can't say I had any clear expectations, Daniel remarked, shaking his head. I suppose I simply had to witness it firsthand. He pivoted toward the door, poised to depart. Just as he was about to leave, James spoke once more. Daniel. Daniel hesitated, his fingers resting on the doorknob. He remained facing away. James paused briefly before asking, what does your mother think about you being here? Daniel's hold on the doorknob grew more intense. He tilted his head just enough to catch James's eye. He confessed that she was unaware. However, I believe she ceased to consider you quite some time back. With that, he exited the office, leaving James Crawford solitary in his domain, gazing at the son he had never known. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Daniel emerged from the imposing Crawford Enterprises building, greeted by the crisp autumn air of Manhattan, his thoughts swirling with a mix of feelings. The exchange with James had left him feeling hollow, as if he had been on a quest for something that was never truly there. For years, he had envisioned this moment, dreaming of the confrontation with the man who had left him and his mother behind, yet the truth unfolded in a way that was far more subdued than he had anticipated. His father was neither a cold-hearted antagonist nor a regretful soul in search of atonement. He was merely an entrepreneur who had made a choice and accepted the consequences. There are no regrets, no justifications offered, merely a stark recognition of what has transpired. It felt nearly more painful than a direct rejection, as at least rejection carried a certain intensity. This, however, was apathy, and it pierced Daniel in a manner he had not anticipated. He wandered through the bustling streets, the cacophony of honking taxis and the murmur of pedestrians merging into a backdrop of indistinct sound. His phone vibrated in his pocket, yet he chose to disregard it. He sensed it was his mother, likely pondering why he hadn't returned her call. Unbeknownst to her, he was present, and he found himself at a loss for words on how to reveal his presence. Could she possibly be upset? Feeling let down? Or would she merely shake her head and declare, "I told you so"? Daniel found himself unprepared for any of those responses. He required some time to reflect on everything initially. In due course, he found his way to Central Park, settling onto a bench that offered a view of the tranquil lake. The cool breeze wafted the aroma of decaying foliage as runners glided by, absorbed in their individual journeys. He reflected on his mother, considering the sacrifices she had endured to provide him with a good life. She juggled 2 jobs, frequently returning home late and weary, but she always ensured he never sensed any lack in his life. Through every birthday, every school event, and every scraped knee, she had always been there. And the man who had bestowed upon him existence. He had been absent from all places. Daniel finally pulled out his phone to check his messages. As anticipated, there were numerous missed calls from his mother, accompanied by a handful of texts. One in particular piqued his interest: "Reach out to me. It holds significance." His stomach knotted as he paused briefly before pressing her number. She answered on the first ring. "Daniel," she exhaled, her voice laced with relief. "Where have you been hiding? I've been attempting to get in touch with you throughout the day." "Apologies, Mom," he murmured, his hand pressed against his forehead. "I simply required a moment to reflect." A silence lingered on the other end. "Where might you be?" she inquired with caution. He confessed in the city. He found himself caught in a delicate balance, reluctant to deceive her while grappling with the uncertainty of how much truth to share at that moment. After a brief pause, his mother finally spoke, asking, "You went to see him, didn't you?" Daniel let out a slow breath. "Indeed." A prolonged hush ensued. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a softness, tinged with a sense of resignation. "I had a feeling you would, in due time." He scowled. "You're not angry?" She released a soft chuckle, though it held no genuine mirth. "Is that you, Matt?" "Absolutely not, Daniel. I had a feeling this day would arrive. I simply wish. I'm uncertain. Perhaps I wished you wouldn't need to seek out answers that might leave you unfulfilled." Daniel leaned in, resting his elbows on his knees. "I had some expectations, but it was clear he didn't care, Mom. He didn't even attempt to feign any sense of remorse. He simply accepted it. As if abandoning us was merely a matter of strategy." She let out a weary breath. "That's simply who he is, darling. That's the essence of who he has always been. Have you ever attempted to get in touch with him?" Daniel inquired with a hint of uncertainty. After a prolonged silence, she finally responded. She conceded, "No. I was youthful, shattered, and far too proud to plead for someone to embrace their own offspring. Honestly, I felt it was best for him to step away if he wasn't truly invested in being part of your life. You are worthy of so much more." Daniel experienced a tightness in his throat. He remarked that you never shared much about him. He simply departed. "I never wanted you to carry hate in your heart as you grew," she said plainly. "He chose his path, and I chose mine. I chose to ensure you always felt valued." Daniel took a deep breath. "You did, Mom. You were sufficient." Silence enveloped the line, and when she finally spoke, her voice trembled with deep emotion. "That's precisely what I've longed to hear." At last, Daniel experienced a moment of clarity that day. Perhaps he could have achieved closure without ever meeting James. Perhaps the solutions had always resided within him, embodied by the woman who had offered him everything, even when she possessed nothing. He rose, surveying the park one final time before declaring, "I'm coming home." His mother let out a sigh of relief. "I will remain present." After ending the call, Daniel inhaled deeply one final time before making his way to the subway. He had devoted countless years in pursuit of something elusive. Justice, recognition, perhaps even retribution, yet ultimately, none of it held significance. His mother was indeed correct. He had no use for James Crawford. He never did. At last, he could begin to embrace life as he had always envisioned it. Before moving on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Daniel lingered in the stillness of his modest Brooklyn apartment, gazing at the soft shimmer of the city lights beyond his window. The encounter with James Crawford had created an unsettling emptiness within him, a gap he found difficult to understand and even harder to bridge. For years, he had envisioned the scene unfolding, maybe an intense clash where his father would finally own up to his errors, or a poignant reunion where James would voice his remorse and plead for absolution. Yet the truth had been harsh, unfeeling. Without anger or guilt, there exists only a calm recognition of what has been. It felt as though Daniel's presence had been reduced to a mere afterthought in the man's narrative. The revelation was sharp, yet strangely, it brought a sense of freedom. Throughout his childhood, he found himself consumed by thoughts of what could have driven his father away, pondering the imperfection within himself that rendered him unworthy of affection. But now he recognized the reality: James's absence was not a reflection of him. It had always revolved around his father's inherent selfishness. With that understanding, Daniel was finally able to release the burden of self-blame. He reached for his phone, gliding through his contacts until he found his mother's number. He had already conversed with her following the meeting, yet an inner urge compelled him to listen to her voice once more. After a brief pause, he made the call, and she picked up without delay. "Daniel," she said with a gentle warmth, the soothing familiarity of her voice enveloping him. "Hey Mom," he said, his voice gentler than he had meant it to be. "I wanted to reach out and see how things are going." She let out a soft laugh. "Darling, there's no need for you to worry about me. Don't forget, I'm the one who gave birth. I reach out to see how you are doing." A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed. I simply longed to listen to your voice." She hesitated, as though she could feel the gravity of his words. "How are you doing?" Daniel reclined on the couch, his fingers combing through his hair. "I'm uncertain. I had hoped that meeting him would provide some sense of closure, yet it only leaves me feeling hollow." She let out a weary breath. "Closure is not something that can be found in others, Daniel. It originates from the depths of one's being. James wasn't about to offer you anything you didn't already possess." Daniel shut his eyes, allowing her words to permeate his thoughts. "You were correct regarding him. Concerning all matters." A hush fell over the line before she finally spoke. "I never wished to be correct about this, darling. I would have sacrificed everything for him to be the father you truly deserved." His chest constricted. "You were sufficient, Mom. You have always been." A gentle sniffle echoed through the line, revealing her struggle to contain her emotions. "Thank you, darling. That signifies more than you realize." They continued their conversation, sharing fond memories and chuckling over tales from his younger days. By the time they hung up, Daniel felt unburdened, as if a heavy load had been removed from his shoulders. Perhaps he hadn't discovered the resolution he sought, yet he had unearthed something far more precious. The understanding that he had never genuinely experienced solitude. As the days unfolded, he immersed himself in his work, dedicating his energy to his projects. He worked as a financial analyst at a modest firm, distant from the affluence and influence his father commanded, yet he took pride in the life he had created. He had toiled diligently for every achievement, relying solely on his own efforts, and that was a truth that James Crawford could never diminish. One afternoon, while enjoying a cup of coffee at a cafe close to Wall Street, he unexpectedly encountered an old college friend, Michael. Years had passed without a word between them, but as they reconnected over coffee, Michael brought up a business opportunity, an investment startup seeking bright minds like Daniel's. Initially, Daniel wavered. He possessed a reliable position, with a consistent income. Yet, there was an exhilarating allure in the notion of creating something from scratch, of demonstrating to himself that he could achieve success on his own terms. Following several restless nights of contemplating his choices, he resolved to take the plunge. He left his job and became part of Michael's startup, immersing himself in long hours and a flurry of meetings. The task was draining yet rewarding. He was creating something genuine, something unbound by his history or his father's legacy. As the months passed and a year unfolded, Daniel discovered a newfound sense of flourishing. The startup soared, attracting investment and growing at an impressive pace. He had established his own identity in the industry, not merely as James Crawford's son, but as Daniel, a self-made individual who achieved his success through unwavering determination. One evening, while getting ready for a significant investors' meeting, he found an unexpected email in his inbox. A journalist was working on a feature about successful entrepreneurs with unique backgrounds. The email referenced James Crawford, suggesting that the journalist was aware of Daniel's association with him. A knot formed in his stomach at the idea of his past being thrust into the limelight. He gazed at the screen for what felt like an eternity, weighing the decision of whether to reply. At last, he inhaled deeply and crafted a response. He was straightforward and clear: I have no ties to James Crawford. My narrative is uniquely mine. For the very first time in his existence, he genuinely embraced the truth of it. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Daniel had always held the conviction that achievement would usher in tranquility, that once he had forged a life distinct from his father's influence, he would finally feel complete. Yet, despite the success of his startup and the growing acknowledgement of his name within New York's financial circles, an underlying sense of unease persisted within him. Regardless of his achievements, a fragment of him remained burdened by the scars of his history. The reality was that no level of achievement could erase the years of neglect, the countless restless nights his mother had faced, or the lingering questions that had plagued him for years. He had struggled fiercely to break free from James Crawford, yet the shadow of that man's presence lingered, gripping him in ways he couldn't dismiss. After a lengthy meeting one evening, Daniel meandered through Central Park, lost in thought. The urban glow danced among the branches, while the brisk fall breeze whispered memories of days gone by. He retrieved his phone, contemplating the decision to reach out to his mother. Days had slipped by without a word exchanged between them, and while he understood she didn't anticipate incessant communication, a sense of guilt gnawed at him whenever too much time elapsed between their talks. As he paused, his phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. Typically, he would brush off such calls, yet an inexplicable force urged him to pick up this time. "Greetings," he remarked with a hint of hesitation. A moment of silence was broken by a resonant voice. "Is that you, Daniel?" His breath hitched in his throat. That voice was familiar to him. More aged, coarser than he recalled, yet undeniably familiar. James Crawford. Daniel's fingers clenched the phone with intensity. "Where did you find my number?" James let out a heavy breath. "I have my methods. I thought it was the right moment for us to have a conversation." A harsh chuckle slipped from Daniel's lips. "You guessed it. After 2 decades, you've chosen this moment as the perfect opportunity." "I realize I'm not worthy of a warm welcome," James confessed, his voice notably softer. "I came across the article regarding your company. You've achieved quite a lot." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I accomplished it on my own." "I understand." A moment of silence lingered once more. "I understand if you don't feel concerned, but I have to admit I'm not doing so well lately. In terms of health." A tumult of contrasting feelings washed over Daniel. A part of him felt the urge to convey to James that he was indifferent, that whatever fate befell him was solely his concern. Yet, a different aspect of him, the one that continued to search for clarity, could not overlook the weight in his father's tone. "What is it that you desire?" he inquired, his voice remaining icy. James remarked, "One conversation to see you. That's all I seek." Daniel paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. Every instinct urged him to turn back, to allow the past to remain undisturbed. Yet, there was an unsettling quality to James's voice, as if this moment held the key to the closure he had pursued throughout his entire existence. "All right," Daniel replied. "A single dialogue. However, I select the location." James nodded in agreement, and they set a time to gather the following evening at a serene eatery in Manhattan. Daniel lay awake through the night, restless and consumed by doubts about his choices. As dawn broke, he realized he could no longer delay his decision. The restaurant was almost devoid of patrons when he entered, his anxiety palpable as he surveyed the space. Then he spotted him, James Crawford, nestled in a corner booth. The man appeared changed since Daniel's last encounter with him. His once formidable physique had diminished, his visage etched with the passage of time and an undercurrent of something more profound, perhaps remorse. Daniel positioned himself opposite, maintaining a facade that revealed nothing. "Go ahead and speak." James inhaled deeply. "I have committed numerous errors. I refuse to justify their actions. Yet parting from you and your mother, that was the most painful of all." Daniel let out a derisive laugh. "That's not something you can claim at this moment. 2 decades were at your disposal to make it right." James gave a slight nod. "Indeed, you are correct. I do not anticipate being forgiven. However, I feel the need to clarify." He gazed at his hands, as though collecting his reflections. "When your mother became pregnant, I was filled with fear. Not about fatherhood, but about the loss of the life I had created. My journey, my standing. I acted with self-interest. I believed I could wipe away my errors by fleeing from them." Daniel felt a constriction in his chest. "You didn't merely run. You have brought about our downfall. My mother endured hardships for years while you enjoyed a life of comfort." "I understand," James replied softly. "Every single day, that decision haunts me." He released a slow breath. "I attempted to persuade myself that my absence was a kindness to you. That you would thrive more in my absence. Yet, the reality is that I lacked courage." Daniel gazed intently, seeking the truth hidden within his father's eyes. He had envisioned this dialogue numerous times, yet none of his envisioned scenarios had equipped him for this moment. A man laid bare, acknowledging his shortcomings with sincerity and no facade. What brings us to this moment? At long last, Daniel posed the question. What prompts a connection after such a long period? James paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. "As my time is limited." He gently tugged at his sleeve, exposing the hospital bracelet hidden underneath. "Advanced cancer. Medical professionals indicate that my time may be limited to just a few months, or perhaps even less." Daniel's heart raced with intensity. He had devoted his entire existence to loathing this man, harboring deep resentment for the suffering he had inflicted. Now, he was receiving the news that James Crawford, the father he had never truly connected with, was on the brink of death. He remained silent for an extended period. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he inquired, "What do you seek from me?" James locked eyes with him. "Not about the money. No sympathy. A fleeting opportunity to connect with my son before time slips away." Daniel sensed a fracture within, the barriers he had meticulously constructed over the years starting to tremble. He was uncertain if he would ever find it in himself to forgive James. He was uncertain if he truly desired to. Yet, a deep intuition whispered to him that turning his back at this moment wouldn't erase the hurt he felt. Before moving on to the next part, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Daniel lingered in the stillness of his New York apartment, gazing at the city skyline framed by the expansive glass windows. The encounter with his father had plunged him into a whirlwind of emotions, a blend of frustration, uncertainty, and an unnamed feeling that lingered just beneath the surface. He had always thought that if he were to encounter James Crawford once more, he would be consumed by nothing but animosity. He had envisioned the encounter countless times. He stood tall, a picture of success, flaunting his achievements, forcing his father to confront the regret of every moment spent in abandonment. Yet the truth had proven to be much more intricate. His father was a man nearing the end, divested of his pride, confronting the twilight of his existence burdened by the heavy toll of his regrets. And that transformed everything. The following days unfolded with an unsettling energy. Daniel immersed himself in his tasks, participating in meetings, managing investments, doing everything possible to prevent his thoughts from drifting back to James. Yet, despite his efforts to cast it aside, the thought lingered on. His father was nearing the end, and he faced a fleeting moment to choose between letting him depart with lingering uncertainties or embracing the opportunity to understand the man whose absence had profoundly influenced his existence. His mother, Olivia, had reached out, her intuition telling her that something was amiss. She remained unaware of the meeting, and Daniel found himself uncertain about how to introduce the topic. She had endured more than her fair share. Yet a part of him longed to hear her voice, to be reminded of the woman who had nurtured him without a second thought. On the third night after encountering James, Daniel found himself navigating the streets of Manhattan, his mind drifting toward the hospital where James was undergoing treatment. He was uncertain of his purpose or destination, yet an undeniable force within him compelled him to persist. Upon his arrival, he discovered James in a modest hospital room, propped up in bed, his formerly robust physique now delicate. The elderly gentleman appeared truly taken aback by his presence, his tired eyes momentarily brightening with recognition. "I didn't think you'd come back," James admitted, his voice rougher than it had been before. Daniel paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind as he approached the threshold. He confessed honestly, "I can't explain why I did it." James gestured toward the chair next to his bed, and after a moment of hesitation, Daniel took a seat. A profound stillness enveloped them, laden with a history of unasked queries. At last, Daniel found his voice. "Reveal the reality to me. Concerning all matters." And for the very first time in his existence, James Crawford did. He reminisced about his early years, reflecting on a time when affluence equated to influence and vulnerability was seen as a flaw. He recounted the moment he met Olivia, expressing how he had loved her in his own self-centered manner, yet had been paralyzed by the fear of losing grip on his meticulously crafted existence. He confessed that upon hearing her news of the pregnancy, a wave of panic had washed over him. He convinced himself that departure was the sole path, that embracing fatherhood would dismantle the empire he had painstakingly constructed. He had persuaded himself it was the right choice. Yet, beneath the surface, he had always been aware of the reality. He had left them not because he had to, but because he was afraid. Daniel absorbed the words, a tempest of feelings swirling within him. He had lived his life under the impression that his father had never cared, yet now he perceived a different truth, a man who had been shattered long before his own existence began. Despite his desire to cling to his anger, he found it impossible to overlook the sorrow in James's voice, the regret woven into each utterance. "I don't expect you to forgive me," James said finally, his voice quivering with emotion. "I simply couldn't depart from this world without expressing how deeply remorseful I am." Daniel forced down the knot that had formed in his throat. After years of anticipation for this apology, he found that its arrival did little to undo the past. It did not alter the pain his mother had experienced, nor the struggles he faced growing up without a father. Yet perhaps, just perhaps, it might alter something entirely different. Perhaps it would enable him to progress unburdened by the heaviness of bitterness holding him back. The ensuing weeks flew by in a haze. Daniel began to frequent James's company, their dialogues evolving into more profound exchanges. Conversations flowed around commerce, existence, and the time that had slipped away from them. It was challenging and far from flawless, yet it held value. Olivia felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her as Daniel finally spoke, yet she remained silent, allowing him to continue. She had come to terms with her history, and she believed in Daniel's ability to choose his own path. One evening, as Daniel lingered by James's hospital bed, the older man regarded him with weary yet serene eyes. "I never had the chance to be your father," he said. "In recent weeks, you have allowed me the opportunity to become something akin to what I aspire to be." Daniel experienced a constriction in his chest. He had never referred to James as Dad, and it seemed unlikely that he ever would. In that instant, he extended his hand and grasped his father's firmly. It represented the most he could extend in terms of absolution. James Crawford departed this life 2 days later. Everything was bequeathed to Daniel in his will. Not only his riches but also his private journals, unsent letters he had penned, fragments of a man he had never fully understood. Initially, Daniel found himself at a loss regarding how to handle everything. Yet, as time went on, he discovered himself immersed in the pages, grasping his father's essence in ways previously unimagined. Months later, as he stood in his office, gazing out at the city that had become the backdrop of his life, a realization dawned on him. For years, he pursued success relentlessly, driven by the desire to demonstrate that he was independent of his father's influence. Yet, at this moment, he found himself standing still for the first time. He was progressing, not in rebellion against his history but in acknowledgement of it.